Hi and welcome to this week's episode of the Page One podcast. I'm Marco.
I'm Tarek.
You've just heard an advert there for Page One, the writer's notebook, which is a little project that we've got going on Kickstarter. It's going great, but it's only running to the 2nd of May, so please do check it out. The link's in the bio and grab your copy today.
Absolutely. This week we're chatting to Adrian J Walker, author of quite a few books. His biggest one is The End of the World Running Club, a book we've talked about a few times on the podcast. We're both big fans of it, as we say to Adrian. And he's got a sequel coming out at the end of the year to it, which we chat to him about as well.
Just announced that.
Yeah.
We talked to him about that. Stephen King was a massive fan of that book as well. Adrian woke up to a tweet one day saying it was a real find from Stephen King, so that must have been a great feeling.
I can only imagine finding that tweet one morning.
Exactly. So we speak to him about that as well.
But we'll be back at the end of the podcast to chat further. Until then, on with the show.
So, I suppose to start at before the beginning, what did you do before your first novel was published? What career did you have before that?
I basically spent my adult life trying to escape from careers.
I know that feeling.
Through various artistic endeavours. But the career I was in, and actually still am to a certain extent, is software.
Right.
So I about the same time I started writing, I was up in my bedroom coding on an old crappy computer, and I've never really stopped doing that. It's always been something I've done, even within the writing field itself. I write little programs to keep track of what books I sell and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Website work, all that kind of thing. But I was when I wrote my first book, I took 6 months out of contracting as an IT contractor, and it was a very slow process. I kind of 6 months probably. The amount of writing I did in that time, I could probably do now in about a month. But it was a good way of getting into it, and quite scary at the same time because I got out of a well-paid job and I wasn't being paid for it. But through doing that, I created the first kind of book that I had. I self-published that, but during that time I went back to software. And it's been sort of in and out ever since, really. Mm-hmm. Whenever I get a bit of, success or leverage on a book, I'm able to not contract. But the nature of writing is you never know what you're going to be earning month to month, year to year. So to have that kind of ability to go back and make some money is quite useful. So right now I'm contracting. Mm-hmm. A sort of short-term thing to bring some pennies in.
Yeah.
Short answer is software.
Software. Yeah. We'll just edit it straight to software. That's fine.
Yeah, software.
And when you took that time off the first time, had you, obviously you've always enjoyed writing, I'm guessing, and always wanted to write. What was it that gave you that spur that said, right, you know what, I'm going to take the time off and I'm going to do this time?
Well, actually, before that time, I tried 2 or 3 times before as well.
Right.
About a year before that. So when I started doing that, I was in Edinburgh, actually, before I met my wife. I'd been travelling for a year and I'd attempted to write a book on a beach in New Zealand on my own. Mm-hmm. And that didn't really work out, as you can imagine. And getting back, it was like, okay, I've got to get back and earn some money. So I went back into software, did a contract, came out, and I just thought, I need to I had the feeling that this was probably the only time in my life where I'd have some peace, mm-hmm. proper peace to actually write. So I guess it was like, okay, before I get into, my 30s at that point, and before I get into, potentially settling down, I need to spend this time, I don't have any responsibilities. Maybe the last time I get to actually sit down and write for a period. So, it was that really. But interestingly enough, it wasn't until, I think a lot of things you hear about writers is that they don't have the time.
Yes.
And the time is the big thing. You need to find the time to write, and it takes a long time to write. I found that it was only when I had kids, when your time becomes very, very precious, that I started to write properly. Because that was the time when I found I've got an hour now. I've got an hour when the kids are asleep, or I'm back from work, and I've got this small amount of time. I need to use it wisely. That really helped me focus onto actually writing. So when I look back on that time, that 6 months that I took off, that luxurious 6 months of no work, anything, I think, how would I use that now? It's like,
yeah, absolutely.
Probably write a few books.
That's right. I suppose that's right, because when you don't have kids, you always think, oh well, I can do this later on.
Yeah.
So you've got that thought that time is infinite, but unfortunately it isn't.
What happened to the book then? That first one that you wrote, what happened to that one?
So that one was called From the Storm, and I self-published that. I'd started going out to agents, pitching to all the agents that did thrillers. It was a thriller. And I think I got one response, which was worded, which was too wordy for a thriller. And that was another little basically.
It's so hard.
I know. Well, actually, you've got to take those sort of things with... you've got to listen to those kind of things, because, I mean, that was someone that had read it and actually taken the time to write down,
that's true.
This is why we don't want it, and that's just quite a big deal for a lot of agents, because they get so many things through the door. So for them to actually take that time made me realise the problem of that book was that I was trying to write something exciting, but I was doing it very, very wordily. I was doing lots of introversion, and made me realise what I really wanted to write at that time. But to answer your question, it was I ended up self-publishing that, and that actually it did quite well. Self-publishing, I sold quite a lot, got a bit of a following, and that helped me write The End of the Road Running Club. Gave me the confidence to do that.
On the self-publishing thing, because I think that would be interesting to anyone that's listening. How did you generate a following? If it's done quite well, obviously it's caught on. Is it just word of mouth, or did you do anything to try and boost its profile at all?
I tried all sorts of things. I mean, there's so many podcasts, or there were at the time, that were coming out that gave you little tips and hints on strategies and tactics, and some things worked, some things didn't. I think I'm trying to think back, that one of the things I did back in those days, during the Edinburgh Festival, I printed a load of books and I left them around the place in Edinburgh. So I left them on park benches with a little note, or in, the Pleasant, places like that. And people picked them up and got in contact. And,
oh, right. Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it didn't create a huge amount of buzz, but it was a kind of way. I think for that time, it's more about the confidence for me. I needed to know that people liked what I was writing. It wasn't so much about getting a big readership. I think the biggest help was when Running Club came along. It was actually the title that did the biggest thing. And I did a lot of research into how Amazon works. Right. Search engine with the categories, and how you use your title to kind of create search results. And I knew I was writing a book about the end of the world and running. So
put them together.
Kind of drove why I called it the End of the World Running Club.
It's kind of like the Daily Mail headline approach.
Exactly. Yeah, you've got to get the information in there. Yeah. And it worked. People were searching for those things, and when it came up, they bought it, and it built it up. But to be honest, it's still a dark art. I don't really know how it all works. I think you've just got to try different things and be prepared to fail a lot with self-publishing. And eventually you get a following, and you get a readership, and they help a lot. Building a mailing list is a really big thing. Yeah. Okay. And if you guys do that, you're trying to build a kind of email list, because people listen a lot more and they respond a lot more when it's email over Twitter or Facebook. It's a different kind of mentality you're in when you're reading email, I think.
Yeah, I suppose it feels that it's more directed directly at you as opposed to sort of shouting into the...
What sort of stuff do you tend to send by email? Is it kind of one-to-one messages, or is it like short stories, or what kind of stuff do you share?
I tend to do short stories. I've done a few short stories by email. Mostly pre-order alerts. The last book I released self-published was called The Other Lives, which was last year. And I sent out a kind of reader's pack for everyone that pre-ordered it, including things like scans of my notes, the music that I'd recorded that went along with the book.
That's cool.
Little things that you wouldn't normally get with a book.
Yeah.
To keep people engaged. It's that a very personal kind of thing, really. Because once you start getting a following on a mailing list, they do tend to readers do tend to interact with you quite heavily, and it's quite nice a lot of the time.
Feedback both ways there that's happening. That's quite good.
Yeah.
And then, so End of the World Running Club obviously is the book that most people would know you for. What was the story with that? How did it come into being, and then how did it suddenly explode, as it seemed to do?
Well, I was living in Benally, and I knew I'd always had a kind of idea that I wanted to write some sort of apocalyptic story. And I was getting into running at the same time. And I also had 2 young kids, and I was living in Edinburgh. So it all kind of started off from there. The problem I had was when I started out, I was originally writing a more traditional kind of apocalyptic book. It was about a guy who already knew how to run with a group of friends who knew how to run.
Right.
So they were going to run across the landscape of post-apocalyptic Britain with no problem, really. They were just going to be able to do it. And it wasn't really working out for me because it just didn't work because it's easy, it's just a journey. So I started to think about a runner's journey. If you've ever sort of run or started to run, it's very painful to start with, and it's getting yourself off the sofa is hard enough. Actually, doing 5K or 10K or a marathon is even worse. But that journey is very slow and painful, but it takes you on a journey. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to kind of mirror that journey, and I found I wanted to mirror that journey in the story.
Yeah.
So it became a lot more about running than it did about the end of the world, and actually became a lot more about fatherhood and the issues that parents have when they first start out than the end of the world as well. So it's very difficult to know how it all came together, but those things were definitely heavy on my mind when I was writing it, so they naturally came out. And I think that's what made it work, because you have to try and resonate with someone. That's how you write. That's what writing is. You're trying to resonate an idea, and it definitely resonated with runners and young fathers and parents. Yeah,
well, I think from my point of view, what it was the sort of the human side of it that, I've got 2 young kids, and it was that human side of Ed that really resonated with me. Even at the start, Ed, I think this is a deliberate choice that you made, but he's not the most likable character. He's he could be doing more around the house and stuff.
Dick,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I suppose that resonated. Maybe I'm a dick. That's what resonated with me. But, and then to see the journey, as you say, it is a journey that he goes on, both literally and metaphorically. And I absolutely loved it, actually. I thought that, especially the ending, I thought was brilliant.
Thanks.
Yeah, I liked it a lot as well. And unlike Mark, I don't have any kids, but I do quite enjoy running. And I thought you completely nailed that feeling of when you first start to run, and that kind of feeling of this is just, I can barely go 10 steps, never mind like a K or 10K or whatever. Yeah. And that growth from someone who's never done any running to actually trying to run 20 miles a day for 6 days, whatever it was towards the end was I thought you completely nailed that part. And I think I found that very interesting. And the setting I thought was excellent. So I thought that was a very unusual book. It had a lot of different appeal to a lot of different places and put them all in this one pot. And I thought it worked really, really well.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, there was definitely, as I was going along, I found, the places they go along the way I know quite well, and I found I wanted to get across that idea of of Scotland and England, both of them as places, and to kind of shed light from them and create a kind of spotlight on what those places were like and the people are like in them. But yeah, thanks, Judge.
No, thanks for writing it, because it was really good. So you wrote End of the World Running Club, and then what was the process with that? Did you self-publish that first, or did you get picked up? You self-published.
So that was self-published, and that I think the day I self-published it was the day that we moved to. We'd already moved to Aberdeen at that point, and we were moving to Houston, Texas, with my wife's work. And I think it's the day I published it that we moved. I think it was about that. So we were over there for a bit, about a year. We were supposed to be there for longer, but we ended up, after about 10 months, having to move back. And the book had done really well, and it was starting to actually generate a fair income. Something that we were starting to think could become quite a good thing for me. Is I wouldn't have to work in IT anymore. But we were hit with this news that we had to move back, so we were going to have to move back somewhere. We didn't know where, and I was faced with going back to work. So to have this sort of mild success trajectory, and then to have to think, I've got to go back to back. I think I'm trying to get out. And the story is, we were in a Mexican restaurant, me and my wife, and we were talking about what I was going to have to do and what we would have to do, where would we live. And I got a ping on my phone, picked up the phone, and it was an editor at Penguin Random House, Emily Yao, who had picked up the book, read it, and liked it, and wanted to offer me a deal with Penguin. So we were talking about what we're going to do. It was like, there you go. That's what we're going to do.
Brilliant.
So yeah, that was a pretty big moment to have that. And from there, it was basically getting involved with editors and the whole. I mean, they put a huge amount into that book. They really did get behind it, and I'm forever grateful for them for doing that. I mean, they put all the outside advertising up. It's all these. We had a map of where all the adverts were in Britain for the book. We got the BBC Two book club, the Radio 2 book club, Simon Mayo, and that was amazing. It was just an amazing time. We'd moved back to London at that point, so to be right in the hub of it all at that point, where it was all sort of happening, was amazing. So, but yeah, it wouldn't have happened without self-publishing. That's something to. I kind of did things back to front, because I didn't have an agent. I do now, but it was I published, got a publisher, and then got an agent.
That's right.
And when you got the editor, did they want much change? Did the book change quite a lot from when you done it yourself to when it went out, or was it the same text?
It was. We dropped about 10,000 words.
Okay.
But the story didn't change that much. It was mostly just guff, stuff that didn't need to be in there. And there was a bit of bringing out some of the other characters like Beth, and but not as much as you'd think. There wasn't a huge amount. I'd already hired an editor beforehand when I self-published, so it was fairly clean when I self-published.
And then after that, I was trying to look at the published books. It's not easy to see the order that they came out in. Was it The Last Dog on Earth after that, or was it Colours?
Colours was a self-published thing that I'd done.
Right.
I just self-published before Penguin got involved with the Running Club. Then they offered me a 2-book deal, the first of which was The Last Dog on Earth. Although what they really wanted all along was the sequel, which I've just announced today.
I was going to come to that. Yeah, very excited to read about that. We'll come back to that and ask you a few questions about that if we can towards the end.
Good.
So The Last Dog on Earth, and again, all of your books seem to be around the realm of sort of, as a very broad category of speculative fiction type.
Yeah.
Is that what you enjoyed reading? Is that what you enjoy reading?
Yeah, I do struggle a little bit with reading. I'm probably the worst reading writer
Right.
Really out there. A book really has to grip me for me to enjoy it, and I do try. I mean, I get sent loads of books all the time, and I read a lot, but a lot of the time it just doesn't work. And I think a lot of the time what I write is what I want to read, and I think that's a good piece of advice for any writer is to do that. You know, but I always the books I always enjoy reading are the ones that have a what if, you know, a kind of a big what if question at the beginning. That and, you know, very good language always grips me. So I like David Mitchell because they're very big sort of what if books. But yeah, I suppose that's why I never set out to be in speculative fiction, but it tends to be what I gravitate to now. It has to be a kind of question.
Yeah. The Other Lives, which I think was your most recent self-published book, that sounded, I've not read that one myself, but it sounded like it was very much a commentary on, you know, it was using the what if question really to be a commentary on what was happening just now. Is that fair to say?
And the Last Dog on Earth as well, to a certain extent, became that way. I mean, I think the last few years it's very difficult to be in that dystopian speculative realm without addressing what's going on politically and all around the world and globally. So, yeah, I mean, interestingly, the End of the World Running Club, although I always had that kind of idea of a dystopian book, ended up not being quite so much about the dystopia as the family, whereas the ones since tend to be more about the dystopia and that question. Yeah.
But before we move on from the End of the World Running Club, there was one thing. I mean, so you got the ping about the publisher when you were in the Mexican restaurant, but I also saw, I think it's a pinned tweet on your Twitter profile. You got what was it like when Stephen King, presumably that was out of the blue, but he suddenly said that he loved your book.
Well, that was fairly recent, actually. That was after the American publication. And we've lived in a number of places. So last year we were living in France, and we were living in this very old farmhouse. And I was getting up at 5 o'clock to write. So I was walking through this creaky old farmhouse at 5 o'clock in the morning with my phone, sat down to write, and I just saw all these notifications and you know, Stephen King had done this tweet. And I immediately spilled my coffee over the keyboard. So Stephen King owes me a new... that's just one of those moments where you think, I mean, for me, I've always been a Stephen King fan, but for me, that was a really weird kind of circle. Because to think that when I was 16, 17, reading his books, they resonated enough with me to make me want to write. You know, it was a big reason for why I wrote. To be able to write other words that resonated back with that person. Very odd.
Yeah, absolutely.
Still can't really get my head around that. It's very, very odd.
There's definitely similarities, I think, between your work and his. I think stuff like 11/22/63 or The Stand, you know, there's definitely stuff in his, especially in his wider books, but, you know, not so much about a one-person story, but it's been a big, open, epic story. So it's definitely something of a similarity there, I think.
Oh, definitely. I mean, there's no doubt his writing's affected mine. There's a lot of horror in. There's horror in most books, to be honest. But I mean, there's a lot of horror in what I write. It's not so much ghouls and ghosts, but the horror of images and events. And whenever I write those pieces, I'm definitely thinking in that headspace that he created. Definitely.
And when you're writing your novels, do you have a particular plan? Are you a big planner, or do you just have a sort of set idea of where you want to go to and work your way?
I've become a planner, definitely. So I've tried, you know, the plotting pantsing kind of thing. You plot or you go by the seat of your pants. The pantsing doesn't work for me. I can't do that. I need to know where I'm going at least. But I've got a big A3. I've got a big section here you won't see, but that's where I do my storyboarding.
Right.
So when I come up with an idea, I'll now storyboard each act, you know, and break that down into bits, and I'll create scene cards for each part of that act, and then rearrange them. So yeah, definitely planner.
And how long do you let an idea sort of sit with you before you say, right, this is the one I need to start writing that?
probably between 6 months and a year, I'll be thinking about something before it becomes something I'll write. So I've just pitched about 12 ideas to my agent for the next book. Sorry, I should say next book but one, because there's another one out, which I'll tell you about later.
Yes.
Okay.
And those ideas have been mulling around for the last year at least. So the one that I'm going to do is a year old, definitely, yeah.
All right, so you actually go and you say, I've got these 10, 12 ideas, I don't know which one I want to do next. Tell me which one you think is the best type thing.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, interesting.
But I've done a full synopsis for each one as well, which is another horrific thing to do, but it's really worth it in the end when you do those things, yeah.
And then how do you, once you've started to write and you've done that first draft, how does it go from there? Do you have quite a lot of drafts after that? Do you go back to your storyboard, or do you kind of let it sit for a while?
It depends. Every book I write seems to be different. There's different sort of bits to it. I mean, The Other Lives, that was about 15 drafts and then about 10 revisions on top of that. Whereas the sequel to Running Club was maybe 3 drafts with a couple of revisions.
Okay.
And that's because it benefited from, a couple of weeks of literally just scribbling on a A3 pad, nailing each scene. I don't know. I wouldn't say I'm honing that process. I think there'll probably come a time when I'll write a book just straight off. That'll probably happen at some point, but it's definitely becoming quicker with the planning process, definitely. How do you guys write? What do you do?
I'm quite a big planner, but then I'll plan out quite a lot of things, but then I'll find myself in a bit often where I suddenly start thinking, oh, but does that work because of that thread or that thread? And I can get quite caught up in sort of very small details that probably don't matter at the end of the day. But I need a plan. I definitely need a plan, because otherwise I don't know where I'm going.
See, I think I'm almost a bit the opposite. I always start writing and think, I wish I'd planned more, because I don't really know where I'm going, or I'll have a scene in my head and I'll do a scene, and then going on from that scene, I feel like I don't have the characters done right in my head, so I don't know where they're going. So I think what I need to do is I need to sit there and say, who are the characters in this piece? Where would they take the story next? And if I try to push it through too artificially, it doesn't, I can't just get it, I just don't write anything. I just can't get it, or it just sounds crap and I can't get it to work.
Yeah.
So I think I need
characters to lead you, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. So I do need to do more planning on that side of things, I think.
But there's a story I always remember about the plotting and the kind of pantsing, for want of a better word. Have you ever listened to the BAFTA screenplay podcasts?
No, I haven't actually, no.
They're really good, really good. Each one is it's a different screenplay artist from different genres, all over the place. Some famous, some aren't. Charlie Kaufman does one. There's one by Richard Curtis, I think. But they each do a kind of a speech to the BAFTA. I suppose it's a group of members. It's live, basically, but they do a kind of talk on screenwriting and their approach to it. And they're really good. But there's one I always remember. It's by John Logan.
Right. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
John Logan. Yeah. He wrote screenplays for Gladiator. And he talks about his process, and he gets up at 4 a.m., writes for 4 or 5 hours. But when he was writing Gladiator, he planned a lot of it, but there was a moment when he realised that I can't remember the character, the Emperor, who was played by
Joaquin Phoenix.
Yes, Joaquin Phoenix had never had a scene which was just him and his sister. So 2 key characters. They never had a scene just the 2 of them. Mm-hmm. So he thought, right, today I'm just going to write a scene. I'm going to put them in a room. I don't know what this scene's about. I'm just going to put them in a room and see what happens. Mm-hmm. And that was the scene where he ends up kissing her.
Yeah.
Okay.
You get that whole kind of incest thread. And he said he had no idea that was going to happen.
Oh, that's interesting.
And if he just stuck to his plan, that wouldn't have happened. And that actually drives a huge amount of the story in the film. So I've always remembered that if planning's great, but you do have to take a few detours sometimes to find what your characters really are doing. So it's worthwhile every now and again just sort of freeing off the shackles, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, sometimes you can be writing a scene and if you know the characters, they'll sometimes say things or do things that you weren't expecting, which sounds ridiculous to someone that isn't a writer, but it can happen because you're in the scene and suddenly you say, well, no, wait, this happens. And it diverts you from the plan, but sometimes that can be a good thing, definitely.
Yeah. And it actually, when you do that, it actually means that you're doing the right thing. It means your character's developing.
And where do you stand on all the sort of stereotypical or cliche, I suppose, more rules of writing, like kill your darlings or write what you know and all that sort of stuff?
Definitely write what you know, but you have to. I think that's kill your darlings is an easy one. I would say don't kill them, just put them in a box somewhere. And come back to them. Because, but no, they might be useful. But write what you know is a difficult one. So I've written probably half of the main characters I've written through self-publishing and publishing have been female, first person. I tend to write first person a lot more, and half have been male. So I think if you stick to write what you know, that would be a very difficult thing to do because you're going into realms of gender and sexuality that a lot of male writers probably fall into those traps and they don't actually write very well. But as an example, what I suppose what I'm trying to say is you have to identify the bits within the thread that you're trying to write that you do know, but you don't necessarily always have to write as yourself. You have to write as a person that you identify with. The sequel to Running Club, I know we'll get onto this anyway, is written from Beth's perspective, Ed's wife. So I'm writing as a female. But actually what I found a lot through that book was that I identified a lot more with her than I did with Ed. I put a lot more of myself into her character than I did into Ed. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is write what you know, but don't let that constrain you to certain characters or situations.
Yeah.
You just have to put yourself into everything that every situation and character that you're writing, if that makes sense. Yeah,
no, I think so. And also, I suppose, with that one, it's what they always say about observing people and, the more experience that you have or that you have of a situation or something, you can take bits of that and put that into the novel. So you're not, as you say, writing every character as yourself or something.
Yeah, but you can take the stuff like being a dad or doing the running, and you can use that to inform the world that you.
Yeah, those are the things that people will pick up on. But it might even just be a sentence or a nuance that you've noticed about something. If you bring that into it, that can sometimes make or break a reader. If they. A lot of it is getting someone on side, and if you can identify in some way with an aspect of life that will bring them on, and you can only do that by writing what you know. You can't pretend, that kind of stuff.
And what about do you ever have periods of writer's block or anything like that? And how do you get over it if you do?
No, I've not had any of that yet. The only time I almost had that was very early in the morning. I was trying to sort out a scene in the next book but one, and I was literally hunched over a table, scribbling down what I was trying to write. I always scribble down what I'm going to write before I write it, and nothing was coming out of the pen. I was just there. I had no idea what the scene was, who the people were. That was quite a scary moment because it was like, I don't know how to push this on. I just walked away, and I came back later and it's fine. But as far as ideas coming, I've got too many ideas to write at the moment. So I'm kind of keen to get as many things down as possible before that kicks in, the writer's block.
Well, then let's talk about your next book then, which is the End of the World Survivors Club, which is the sequel to the Running Club. So how did that come around?
So when I finished Running Club, I knew at the time I was never going to write a sequel because it felt like, although, without giving too much away, that there is a journey yet to be had, Ed's journey was complete. So, he was a different person. He developed, and that was it. So I'd said there would never be a sequel. But like I say, the publishers, Penguin Random House, really wanted another book. So eventually, actually what happened, I wrote The Last Dog on Earth, and that came out. That was the second book. The third book I wrote, I'm really happy with. I gave it to the publishers, but it wasn't quite what they wanted in terms of their genre. They're quite a specific genre, and they had a very specific idea of what they wanted me to write.
Yeah.
So it didn't quite fit. So I took that off the table, and I said, so what do you want me to write? What is it you want me to write? And they went, a sequel to Running Club. So I've been saying for the last 3 years. So I said, well, I could, but I just don't know how I'd do it, realistically, because I'd basically be taking a character that is developed into a world, and there's nothing for him to do. It's just going to be moving, basically. There's nothing changing. And they said, well, it doesn't have to be Ed. It can be anyone else. Mm-hmm. So that made me think, and I realised, the person that's taken the back seat in the whole of that story is Beth, the wife. She's the one that's been literally holding the 2 children while he has his journey of discovery. So I thought it'd be interesting to explore what her character was really like and what she would do going forward. So that was a bit of an eye-opener, and I don't think I've had so much fun writing a book as I have with this one, because it was just great. Really put everything into her character, and she has to basically, the challenge she faces is far worse than Ed's.
Brilliant. Well, can you give us, sorry, maybe you can't say this, but is Ed in it at all, or is it just about Beth and her? Or maybe every
character you want to be in that book is in the book.
Oh, brilliant. Fantastic.
Okay.
And was it an easier book to write was it an easier book to write because it was almost like putting on an old coat, like we're going back to this world that you'd already made? Was it?
Yeah. And actually it was liberating, because I realised that, that world doesn't have to just be in England and Scotland. It's all over. So it opened up a whole new kind of idea of, truth be told, I'd like to extend it even further and continue the story after this one. But yes, having the characters fully developed and the background and the backdrop, it was quite easy to just drop into that.
Well, my wife is desperate to know what happened to Bryce, so I'll tell her that she might be able to find that out if she buys the book. And you said, was there another book that... Yeah,
so the one that I was going to do for Penguin, which I haven't, is called The Human Son.
Right.
Okay.
Son, S-O-N, not S-U-N. And that's being published by Rebellion, a sci-fi imprint, next year. So we've had to stagger the releases. But that's all done. It's just in the editing process right now. And I'm really excited about that one. That's the one that I really... I put a lot into that. That's also first-person female narrative, but it's a lot more sci-fi, much more hard sci-fi. Yeah.
So much more sci-fi than they were expecting when you handed it in.
It's more sci-fi than my publishers wanted, but it has a very human aspect to it, which I think is starting to become what I generally put into most of my work.
Yeah.
Can you give us any hint of what the story's about at all, or are you not allowed to?
No, I can. I'm going to be speaking about it soon anyway, but it is set 500 years in the future. There are no humans left on the Earth. It's the only beings left are a small group of superhuman, super intelligent humans, which were genetically engineered by humans to counteract climate change. And the first things they did to counteract climate change was to eradicate humans.
Problem solved.
So after 500 years, they brought the planet back to stability. They have to decide whether to bring back humans or not, to resurrect them and bring them back. And there's various different arguments about whether they should or not. Long story short, one of them, Ema, a female, decides to engineer a single human and raise this human as her own to show everyone what a human is like. And from that life, this young boy, they have to decide whether to bring back humans or not. So the whole story is her raising a child, a human child, and getting to understand what humans are like and how they work. And it becomes basically a motherhood story.
Sounds brilliant.
Yeah, it sounds very interesting. Yeah.
Nice.
Sounds like a much smaller story, and in some ways a very wide story, but in a lot of ways quite a small story.
Yeah, it's over 16, 17 years, the story. So it deals with every year of the child's life. But It's big in terms of the idea of the planet and the environmental aspects and what we've done. But yeah, it's much more small. You're right in terms of how a mother gets to know a child and how a human develops and how they become an adult.
Brilliant.
And with all the interest around the world, the End of the World Running Club, and now the Survivors Club, I'm sure there'll be a lot of interest in. Have you been approached to turn that into a TV show or a film or anything like that?
Dramatic rights, yeah. We've had one of the big things Penguin wanted to do was to go out and try and get dramatic rights, and they did a lot early on, and they had some interest, but it never actually turned out. So what's happened in the last year is I met an actor and a director, James Hillier and Barnaby Southcombe, an actor and a director, and they're interested in the project, and they are helping me write a screenplay pilot for a series.
Brilliant.
And they have contacts in Netflix and Amazon, basically the two places you go to get anything done these days.
Yeah.
So we're hoping to pitch that in the next couple of months.
Wow.
Off the back of Survivors Club coming out to try and get some sort of deal. But these things there are so many things made these days, so many things that are bought, and never made.
Yeah.
So I'm not putting any. I'm enjoying the process of writing a screenplay. That's really good fun. Very different sort of process. But whether it turns out, I don't know. I'm hoping it will. It's feeling really good. It's coming together. But we'll see.
I think it as a story, I think it would suit a sort of long form TV show rather than a film. Actually, definitely. Yeah. Especially with the sequel and the possibility of further stories going on.
Yeah.
Definitely see each character being a central character in a certain way.
Well, we look forward to watching that on Netflix in a couple of years. And beyond that, you said you've got plans. So are you about to start writing a new novel just sooner?
Yeah, it's quite hard at the moment because there's a lot of stuff going on I'm working at the moment. I'm trying to help my dad move up to Aberdeen as well. He's selling his house and moving close to the family. So it's hard to find the time, as usual, to write. But I definitely have two ideas which I'm sort of starting, kind of.
Yeah.
I imagine the next couple of months they'll sort of really start to take off again. But yeah, it's about discipline at the moment, getting up the right time and doing the work.
So do you write in the morning then? Is that what you do?
Yeah.
You write early in the morning, yeah.
Yeah. If I can get up at 5, I'll get the word count. Anything after that, no.
And have you ever thought about doing anything else, doing a script for a comic book or something similar?
Yeah, I like I say, I really enjoyed the screenplay stuff. That is a whole different discipline of just dialogue and scene setting. There's no internal thoughts or any of the description. It's literally you're just trying to get across dialogue and action. I'd love to do more of that. I haven't thought about comic books, but yeah, I like graphic novels. That'd be quite cool. Mm-hmm. I think computer games are a big thing as well. A lot of writing work in there as well.
But yeah, there's some games that now narratively are amazing, and also they must have to write. You'll have one version of the story, but then you'll have to write all sorts of different paths.
Yeah, it's like the old Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, exactly.
Roll the dice and hit the.
And there's definitely quite a lot. There's quite a lot of games. Shorter game, 2-3 hour games made by smaller studios, which are just pure stories. Sometimes the gameplay is not really there. It's just about a way of having a story that's not a film or a TV show or a book. And it's I think we're starting to see this experimentation. I think in video games of how they're not all just shooters or something. You can do
there's definitely
other things with them
that pulls people along.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I'd love to do that. Any kind of writing work, I think. I've asked my agent about what other things can you do. What other kind of narrative. There's Rebellion, who are publishing The Human Son. Because they're a hard sci-fi imprint. They don't have to worry about literary crossovers or anything like that. They basically, I was speaking to the editor the other day, and he was saying what they do is they sit down and they decide, right, let's create a mashup of Sherlock Holmes and Cold War, 50s.
Yeah.
And that's the world. And then we'll hire writers to write books in that world.
Okay.
Yeah. So they sit and they literally brainstorm a kind of world, and they build it, and then they just say, right, we'll get that guy, and we'll write a series, and then we'll market that. So I love the idea of that, of being given a kind of world to, write in.
To play in, yeah. A Rebellion, is that the same? Are they the same ones that own 2000 AD? Is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
cool.
yeah, so they do that already in
were,
the comic side, then I suppose.
Exactly. Yeah. So they were a computer games company,
That's right,
but they've got the Solaris books and all the other stuff that are in there. Yeah.
Well, I suppose we'll jump to some rapid fire questions, if you don't mind. And I'll jump in straight in with Star Wars or Star Trek.
Star Wars.
No hesitation.
Marvel or DC?
Marvel.
Okay.
I like Batman. Oh no.
Bird Box or A Quiet Place?
No. Right, neither. Because I'll tell you why. Have you heard of The Silence by Tim Levin?
No, I don't think I have.
Okay, so The Silence was a book written by Tim Levin, a UK sci-fi author, in 2015.
Right.
And it is basically A Quiet Place. But before A Quiet Place came out.
Right.
And it's a brilliant book, and the film is coming out of that. But there's a lot of talk in the... sorry, this isn't quickfire at all. Anyway, you have to go and see it, and you have to read the book, but you have to remember that A Quiet Place came after The Silence.
Okay.
Anyway, I would say Bird Box over A Quiet Place.
Okay.
I saw it the other day.
Okay. TV or cinema?
Cinema.
Real book or ebook?
Real book.
And would you rather eat in or go out?
Well, now...
Yeah. What do
Right
you fancy?
No, yeah, eat in at the moment, yeah.
Excellent.
Well, that was ace. That was really fun chatting with Adrian, and I have to say I'm really excited for the end of the World Survivors Club, which comes out at the end of the year, more than I was beforehand.
Yeah, I'm totally looking forward to finding out what's happened to all the characters, and my wife will be pleased to hear that Bryce also features in it. I thought it was also really interesting listening to Adrian talk about how he'd moved from self-publishing into publishing, although seems to still have a foot in both camps there.
It's interesting how certain types of publishers are happy with one type of book, but then another type of book they're not really interested in, and that's quite an interesting dilemma to have.
I know it is strange given how successful the End of the World Running Club was, but it shows you it is all about the genre for some publishers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Adrian also mentioned Tim Levin's The Silence there. The movie of that is actually out on Netflix this week. It stars Stanley Tucci, so we'll definitely be watching that one.
And Tim's actually a guest on the podcast in the next few weeks, so we're excited to talk to him soon. And anyone out there who's a fan of Tim, please send in your questions for us. You can get in touch by sending us a tweet to @right_gear or an email to podcast@rightgear.co.uk. Thanks to Simon Stokes for all his help with the podcast.
And we'll just leave you with a bit more info about page 1, which, as we say, is now out on Kickstarter and runs until the 2nd of May. So go and grab yours now.
Waste no more time, people.
Exactly. And we'll see you next week.
See you later.